Kenya. Margaret, welcome to Africa Live and thank you for joining us. What more can you tell us about this deal, which has generated plenty of reaction here in Kenya, as well as the implications of the High Court suspension of the deal?
Thanks for having me, sir. So we have seen the public outcry that has come from the two petitions that have been filed in court, one by the Consumer Federation of Kenya, citing data protection and privacy concerns, mostly because there were no...
Kenya just did something that sent shockwaves through Washington. By suspending a major health cooperation deal with the United States, Nairobi didn't just pause a policy, it challenged an entire power structure. When Washington called it a strategic setback, it revealed the real story. This wasn't about health. It was about influence, control, and an Africa that is no longer playing by old rules.
The moment Kenya announced it was suspending a major health cooperation agreement with the United States, the reaction rippled far beyond hospitals, clinics, and policy offices. What might have sounded like a technical pause in a development program was immediately framed by Washington as a strategic setback. That phrase mattered. It revealed anxiety, not just disappointment. It suggested that something larger than a health project was at stake. Influence, credibility, and the assumed balance of power between Africa and one of the world's most powerful nations. Kenya's decision landed like a warning shot, signaling that the era when African states quietly absorbed external priorities may be giving way to something more assertive, more selective, and more confident. For decades, health cooperation has been one of the most effective tools of United States engagement in Africa. It carried moral authority, humanitarian legitimacy, and strategic value all at once. Through funding, expertise, and infrastructure support, health partnerships built goodwill while embedding the United States deeply into national systems. In Kenya, such cooperation became especially significant. The country has long been viewed as a regional anchor, a gateway to East Africa, and a dependable partner in diplomacy, security, and development. That is precisely why Kenya's decision to hit pause felt like more than a policy disagreement. It felt like a challenge to assumptions that have guided United States engagement on the continent for years. The suspended agreement centered on public health cooperation, disease surveillance, prevention programs, data sharing, and institutional support aimed at strengthening national health capacity. On paper, the goals were straightforward and widely supported. Improve readiness for outbreaks, strengthen health systems, protect lives. Strategically, however, the deal mattered to the United States for reasons that went well beyond health outcomes. Health cooperation creates access to data, to institutions, to decision makers. It fosters long-term dependency on technical support and funding streams. It also reinforces the image of the United States as an indispensable partner in moments of crisis. In an era of global competition, these partnerships are not neutral. They are instruments of influence. Kenya's pause forces a closer look at why a government would step back from such a seemingly beneficial arrangement. The reasons are rooted in sovereignty, domestic accountability, and a growing discomfort with partnerships perceived as unequal or overly conditional. Kenyan policymakers have increasingly emphasized the right to define national priorities without external pressure, especially in sensitive areas like public health, where decisions directly affect citizens' lives. Health data, regulatory authority, and emergency response are not abstract technical matters. They are core functions of the state. Suspending the deal signaled a willingness to reassess who holds decision-making power and on what terms cooperation should continue. Domestic politics also played a role. Public awareness around foreign involvement in national systems has grown. Citizens are more informed, more vocal, and more skeptical of arrangements that appear to favor external interests over local needs. In Kenya, questions emerged about transparency, accountability, and the long-term implications of deeply embedded foreign programs. Leaders faced pressure to demonstrate that national interests come first, not donor expectations. Pausing the agreement allowed space to respond to these concerns and to show that cooperation is a choice, not an obligation. There is also the broader issue of conditionality. For many African countries, past partnerships with powerful nations came with strings attached, sometimes subtle, sometimes explicit. These could shape policy directions, procurement decisions, or institutional structures in ways that limited flexibility. Kenya's move reflects a growing desire to reassess whether the balance of benefits still justifies the constraints. It is not a rejection of cooperation itself, but a demand for recalibration. The message is clear. Partnerships must evolve or risk becoming liabilities rather than assets. From Washington's perspective, this is precisely why the decision is framed as a strategic setback. Kenya is not just another partner. It sits at the heart of East Africa's political and economic networks. Losing momentum or leverage there sends an uncomfortable signal across the region. If a country with long-standing ties to the United States can pause a flagship health agreement, others may feel emboldened to do the same. Influence, once questioned, becomes harder to reassert. Health diplomacy has been a cornerstone of United States soft power. It offers moral credibility and practical impact, allowing Washington to engage without the controversy that often surrounds military or economic interventions. A disruption in this domain weakens one of the most effective channels of engagement. It also raises concerns about continuity. Programs built over years rely on trust and institutional alignment. A pause introduces uncertainty, and uncertainty creates openings for alternatives. Those alternatives are part of the deeper concern. The global landscape is increasingly multipolar, and Africa is no longer a passive arena. Other international actors are actively expanding their presence through infrastructure, technology, trade, and health cooperation, often with fewer political conditions. When a country like Kenya signals it is willing to reconsider an established partnership, it invites competition. For Washington, the fear is not just losing a program, but losing ground in a broader contest for relevance. Yet focusing only on what the United States loses misses the more important story: what Kenya gains. By suspending the deal, Kenya asserts control over its public health agenda. It creates space to align external support more closely with national strategies rather than adapting strategies to fit donor frameworks. This autonomy matters. It allows policymakers to prioritize local challenges, invest in domestic capacity, and ensure that partnerships complement rather than overshadow national institutions. The pause also strengthens Kenya's negotiating position. Cooperation that is taken for granted offers little leverage. Cooperation that must be renegotiated on equal footing changes the dynamic. Kenya can now push for clearer terms, greater transparency, and more balanced decision-making structures. This does not weaken partnerships. It has the potential to make them more resilient and mutually respectful. Diversification is another key gain. By signaling openness to reassessment, Kenya reinforces its freedom to engage with a wider range of partners. In a multipolar world, flexibility is power. Countries that can choose among multiple options are less vulnerable to pressure from any single actor. This does not mean abandoning existing relationships, but it does mean refusing exclusivity. Kenya's move fits squarely within this logic. Importantly, this decision also speaks to a growing confidence among African governments. Across the continent, there is a noticeable shift in tone. Leaders are more willing to question legacy arrangements, to renegotiate terms, and to assert national priorities. Aid-based diplomacy, once highly effective, is losing some of its leverage as economies grow, options expand, and public expectations change. Health cooperation, despite its humanitarian framing, is not immune to this shift. This trend does not signal hostility toward the United States. Rather, it reflects a recalibration of relationships. African governments are increasingly clear that respect, reciprocity, and alignment with national goals are non-negotiable. Partnerships that adapt to this reality will endure. Those that rely on outdated assumptions of deference will struggle. Kenya's decision should therefore be understood less as an isolated dispute and more as part of a continental pattern. Africa is asserting itself not through grand declarations, but through practical policy choices. Suspending a deal, renegotiating terms, or exploring alternatives may seem incremental, but collectively these actions reshape the balance of power. They signal that influence must be earned continuously, not inherited from past dominance. For Washington, the lesson is uncomfortable but necessary. Influence in Africa can no longer rely on the weight of history or the scale of funding alone. It must be grounded in genuine partnership, shared decision-making, and respect for sovereignty. Calling Kenya's move a strategic setback acknowledges this reality, even if unintentionally. It admits that something valuable has shifted and that the old playbook may no longer be sufficient. For Kenya, the moment represents a test of resolve. Asserting agency comes with responsibility. Pausing a major agreement requires the capacity to manage transitions, to maintain public services, and to negotiate effectively. It demands clarity of purpose and consistency in policy. If handled well, it can strengthen institutions and enhance credibility. If mishandled, it risks disruption. The choice to pause suggests confidence that the country is ready to shoulder that responsibility. Ultimately, this episode underscores a simple but profound truth. Africa's role in global affairs is changing. Countries like Kenya are no longer content to be arenas where influence is exercised. They are becoming actors who shape the terms of engagement. Health cooperation, once seen as a safe and unquestioned space, is now part of this broader rebalancing. The decisive takeaway is clear. Kenya's suspension of the health deal is not an anti-United States gesture. It is a pro-sovereignty statement. It reflects a determination to engage the world on terms that respect national priorities and public accountability. The strong reaction from Washington reveals how much is at stake and how deeply the shift is felt. Influence in Africa, once assumed, is now contested. And in that contest, African agency is no longer the exception. It is becoming the rule.